This is lesson 7.6. It is renaming fractions and mixed numbers. So the big idea is, what do we do when we have a mixed number and we want to call it by its parts or renaming it? So one example is that I made 2 3/5 loaves of chocolate banana bread, and I want to cut that into 1/5 sized pieces. And then I want to invite 15 friends over and give a piece to each person. And I want to know, do I have enough pieces to give to each person? So before I can do anything, I need to know how many pieces can I get out of my bread if I cut it into a 1/5 sized portion. So to start out with the modeling, I'm going to model my whole numbers, my 2 wholes, and then I'll model my 3/5 parts. So those are my wholes. Then to model the 3/5 part, again, a fraction, the denominator, the bottom number tells us the size of the part, and the top number tells us how many of those we have. So we have 3 1/5 sized pieces out of that whole loaf. A fraction usually is not ever the whole amount if it's like this. Okay, so there's my 3/5. Here, I'll write it up here. And then I want to break up my whole loaves into those 1/5 size parts. So I'll just draw the model right underneath and cut it up into those pieces. Okay. So now that's broken up, and then I will break this one up into 1/5 size pieces. How do I know that I'm making 5 pieces? Because again, the denominator here tells us the size of the piece, and a 5th sized piece, I need 5 of them to make up one whole. So once I model it all out, then all I have to do is add up all the pieces and see how many I have. So I have 5 here, 5 here, and 3 here. So I have 13 pieces. So then going back to the question, if I have 15 people over, will I have enough pieces? No, I don't have enough pieces to give to everybody. I only have 13 pieces. Now here's where it's going to start crossing over, where you're going to be able to do things without a model. How can I rename 2 3/5 as a fraction and not a mixed number? What that's asking you is, how can I name 2 3/5 as just its parts? So if I counted up all of these parts, how many did I have? I had 13 of them. And what is the size of the part? The part is a 1/5 sized piece. So renaming this whole number, this mixed number as a fraction will look like 13 over, what's the size of the part? A 5th sized part. So it's going to be 13 over 5. That is equivalent, or that's the same as saying, 2 3/5. So that's kind of where we're going with the lesson. Okay, try this one. You can pause it at any point and try the problem on your own, and then unpause it and come back and check. So here's the question. Now I need 2 1/4 cups of chocolate chips for this recipe, and I only have a 1/4 cup sized scoop. How many of those 1/4 sized scoops am I going to use to get that amount of chocolate chips? So again, we're not changing the amount of stuff, we're just renaming it by its parts. So we start with the model. If I model the 2 full amounts, and pretty soon you'll be doing this in your head, you can almost visualize what the answer will be when you can start breaking apart these holes into the fractions. If you know that the denominator is the size of the part, it makes it really fast. But it's okay if you're not there yet. Here is how you model it. So I'm going to model my 2 wholes first. Okay, you always want to model what you have first and then work with it. So here's my 2 wholes. Now I need to model my 1/4. Remember that the 4 on the denominator tells us you have a 1/4 sized piece. The numerator, the 1, tells us you only have 1 of those pieces. So my 1/4 will be there. So that's what I have. Now my question is, how many 1/4 sized cups or scoops will I get out of all of this? So I have to rename my whole into its parts, into a fraction. And how am I going to cut that up? How do I know what size pieces to make that? Well, I look at my denominator right here. It's a 4. So I'm going to cut that into 4 pieces. And then I do the same thing for my other. And then I just add all my pieces. So I have 4 of them here, and 4 here, and 1 here. So altogether I have 9 scoops, 9 1/4 sized scoops of chocolate chips. So what that's saying is, if I were to rename 2 1/4, and I only want to name it by its fraction. So we're renaming mixed numbers as fractions. And so I'm converting these whole numbers into the equivalent fraction. So this will be 4, 8, 9. This will be 9 pieces. And what's the size of the piece? It's a 4th sized piece. So it will be renamed as 9/4. So there's a difference between the math answer and the question answer, because the question isn't asking me for this part. It's not asking me for a fraction answer. It's saying use that information to put it into whatever the question is asking, and the question is saying how many scoops. I'm going to need 9 of them. So I go to my chocolate chips and I get 9 scoops using this little 1/4 sized measuring scoop. Okay, we'll try a couple of problems without modeling it, just what the thought process would be when we want to rename. So we're going to rename this mixed number as a fraction. What you think of is, how do I rename this 2 as a fraction? So remember, this is like saying 1 plus 1 plus 4/6. That's what it's telling you. How can I rename this 1 using a fraction? And remember, I want the same size piece, so I want a 6 in the denominator. How can I rename that 1 as a fraction with a 6 in the denominator? We should know really quickly that this is the same as saying 6/6. It's the same thing. And then I want to add my other one, my other 6/6, and then my 4/6. So your thought process is, I'm renaming my 1 as a 6/6, renaming and dropping down. And now, this is the really easy part. All you do is you add the numerators. What do you get? 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And remember, the denominator, you're not adding the denominator. The denominator is the size of the part. You have a 6th sized piece that's going to stay there. So that is your fraction that you've just renamed. Let's try another one. So this is like saying that we have 1 plus 1 plus 1. There's my 3, and then my 2/7. So for the beginning part of this, you are going to want to list out, actually you have to list out all of these steps until I see, well, you should list them all out. And then pretty soon you will do this in your head. So when I want to rename a 1 whole, and I want to rename it, I want to rename it with a 7 in the denominator. Remember, a whole number can be cut into any number of pieces. As long as your numerator and the denominator are the same, then you have 1 whole. So what will I choose? I'm going to do 7/7. So this is the same as 7/7 plus 7/7 plus 7/7 plus my last bit of fraction over here. Then I just add them together. So I have how many? 3 times 7, 21, 22, 23. And my 7 on the bottom is the size of the piece. That stays the same. So my renamed fraction is 23/7. Okay, last one. Again, you can pause it and do the work and then come back and check if it's right. So we want to rename this mixed number as a fraction. Remember, break apart the whole part of it first and then add it together. So the 2, I'm going to rewrite that as a 1 plus a 1 plus my 5/8. Then I just rename my 1 as a fraction. So I can pick any fraction that I want, but I want to stick with something that's consistent with my fraction here. So 8 is going to be my denominator. So this will be 8/8. And then I add them all together. So I have 2 times 8, which is 16, plus 5, which is 21, 21/8, and that's it. And pretty soon you will start seeing there is a shortcut for this, but you're going to have a very good foundation if you can break it apart first and understand really what's happening before you rely on the shortcut.